Hello, my name is Jack Nell. Back in the Army Air Force days, I was known as Skeeter. It's now March of 2001, and I'm going to try and show you about our B-24 bomber crew back in World War II. I took all these pictures with a very bad 35 millimeter camera that had been tossed around, so the quality of the pictures is poor. And actually, the longer we were there, the more this camera got knocked around and the worse the pictures got, so please excuse all the poor photos. The negatives were lost years ago, and through the years I've given away many of the good shots that I had to the crew members as they visited with me, so I'm going to work with what's left of those pictures. On January 5th, 1944, about 11 o'clock at night, I drove into Peterson Field in Colorado Springs, Colorado, about 11 p.m. It was, of course, dark. It was night. It was in the winter. I had a friend with me who was also a bombardier, and we were reporting to meet our new crews. As we entered the field, they stopped us at the gate. We presented our credentials. We drove in. We saw a B-24 landing. I hadn't been around a B-24 before. And since I'd been assigned to a B-24, I was really interested in watching it. So we stopped and watched this B-24 as it approached the runway at Peterson Field. Landing lights were on, making a normal approach. Went lower and lower, then it disappeared below some hangars that were between us and the runway, so we couldn't see it anymore. Suddenly, big explosion, big fire, flames all over. This B-24 had crashed. So we think, boy, this is really great. Here we are pulling in and these things are crashing. So that was my introduction to the B-24. Of course, I saw many, many, many crashes after that, and they're always serious. There's nearly always people killed and hurt. So this is a picture of our worry worm B-24 that we had overseas. We actually had 3 worry worms. This was one of them. This was the second one. And this is a picture of our crew. Our crew was commanded by Captain Sidney Paisner. He's shown here. We had co-pilot Bob Leonard. I was the bombardier. Had navigator Hal Weekly, engineer John Yurko, down on the bottom, starting on the bottom. And the nose gunner was Chick Pearson. The ball gunner was John Slack. The tail gunner, John Matozo. And the top gunner, Rocky Kane. And our radio operator was Elmer Marty. Here's a good shot of the crew in front of a B-24. Got his parachute harness. We didn't actually wear parachutes in the airplane. We wore a harness like he's wearing. And they had packs that could snap onto these harnesses. If you have a full parachute pack on and you're trying to move around in a bomber, it's too cumbersome. So they had these parachutes, and they would just snap onto this harness when you had to jump out. Sid was our captain. Sid Paisner was probably one of the finest pilots in the Air Force. He could fly just as good as any other pilot. There were a lot of pilots, however, who could fly an airplane as good as Sid could. But what Sid had, he just seemed to have an innate knowledge of everything that he was supposed to know to be a good airplane commander. Most of the crew members, including myself, are sure that if we hadn't had Sid Paisner as our captain, we probably might not have made it. He always made the right decisions. He very intelligent, cool under extreme conditions. Both of our pilots were Bobby Leonard, our co-pilot, and Sid. And I know because I would stand or sit right between the two of them all the time, except when I was down in the nose being the bombardier. And I was able to watch these guys firsthand, and they were very cool and calm. and I never did see Sid under stress make a bad decision. He always made the right decisions. When we get back on the ground and I'd review the mission, he always did it right. He was just fantastic. And I loved him dearly. Sid used to tell us that he had a direct pipeline to God, and I think he did. This is our co-pilot, this Bobby Leonard. We called him Buck. One of the finest men I ever knew. He was such a good pilot that overseas they tried constantly to get him to become a captain and have his own crew. But Bob didn't want to do that. He wanted to stay with our crew. And we're sure glad he did, because he was just excellent. This is me with my 1941 Ford. This was the crew car. We used this thing to go everywhere. This is a kind of an interesting photo. You can see down on the tire right here, a little black spot. What that is a big place where they vulcanized the tire. You couldn't buy tires. You couldn't buy new tires. And when you did buy a tire, you had to buy them that are vulcanized and everything else. You had to go down to a place and get a permit to buy a tire. Then you'd take it to the dealer and he'd sell you a tire down to the ration board. One time I bought a tire. They had given me a thing to buy a tire. It's a recap, of course, because you couldn't get new tires. Pulled into a service station, bought a tire. Guy puts a tire on my car, start to leave. As I drive out of the service station, through a little gutter or ditch-like thing, the tire blew out. I'm still in the service station, so I said to the guy, hey, how about replacing the tire? It just blew out. And he said, sorry. He said, you got to have a permit. I had to go back to the ration board and get another permit. Had to prove that the tire blew out. Then they gave me a permit for another tire. It was wild. This shows the type of barracks we lived in Colorado Springs. And of course you can see they weren't too classy, but they were pretty nice. They were nice and warm. This is before, these pictures were taken before all of the crew got there. Hal Weekly wasn't there yet, and a couple of the other guys weren't there. But you can see on the left, Rocky came, and then myself. You can see John Yurko, Sid Paisner, you can see John Slack, Bob Leonard. Here's a picture taken that same day. We'd been flying, and something interesting was going on someplace. The crew always played together. They did everything together. And all the time we were together, I do not ever remember a serious argument. Little squabbles would come up once in a while, but I don't ever remember anything really serious. And the guys played and laughed. Here's Yurko. He's got Bobby Leonard down on the ground there playing around. More shots of the guys playing around. Here's an interesting picture. I'm in my car. This is the window of the car. Got the heater on. I'm smarter than those guys. It was snowing, or had been snowing. And they're throwing snowballs. Now, the interesting thing about this shot, Johnny Matozo's jumping up in the air, trying to stop a snowball that's coming in. Yurko sees it coming, and he's kind of hunched over here. Sid is looking, wondering what Yurko's doing, and just about 1/2 second after this picture was taken, or less than a half second, Sid got hit right in the air with a great big snowball. Here's a shot of Sid and Gladys. We were up at the Garden of the Gods. Gladys Paisner, Sid's wife, was with him there, and we just loved her to death. Some of my happy times there was when I could go over to their place and she'd fix me something to eat, get some really good cooking. She was an excellent cook and just a fabulous woman. We all just loved her. Picture of Bob Leonard and Gladys and Sid still up in the Garden of the Gods. We loved to go up there. It was really pretty. We go up there quite often. Here's a shot of them up at the Cave of the Winds, up at the Garden of the Gods, and it shows the elevation. I think it's 7,000 feet. Maybe you can see it on here. But this is Sid and Gladys. The Worry Worm airplane got its name one evening. We were all up someplace, kind of a tourist trap part of town, and we were in some of these gift shops, and I think Sid spotted this. This was called a Worry Bird. It used to have some big long legs on it. This was hanging from the mirror in my car, and Sid's looking at it, and he said, "Gee, what a great idea. Why don't we name our airplane the Worry Worm?" And we all thought that was a great idea. So we bought this thing, and we just kind of saved it, even though it's not a worry worm, just to remind us of those good times. We had a series of crew pictures taken of the crew there at Colorado Springs. And this is one of a series that I'll show you. Another shot there taken in Colorado Springs. And still another taken there at Colorado Springs. On the 6th of April, 1944, we left Peterson Field, took a train over to the factory where they make B-24s in Lincoln, Nebraska, and picked it up. Then we flew the airplane down to Florida, down to South America, across the ocean to Africa. Then we flew from Africa up into Italy, and we were soon at our base, which was Lecce, Italy, L-E-E-C-E. And we flew all of our combat missions out of Lecce. Now this is a picture of our tent. Everybody there lived in tents. And as you can see, we made an attempt to fix it up. We've got some rocks around it that we painted white. On the left you can see just a part of a tank. That's where we'd wash our face and shave. I'll show you a little better shot of that in a minute. And in fact, we even had a watermelon patch. We got some watermelon seeds, planted some watermelons, and finally we had a watermelon about 6 inches in diameter. So we decided when we come home from the mission today, we'll have watermelon. But when we got home from the mission, we found out somebody else had watermelon. They'd wiped our watermelon. So anyhow, this is our tent. And I'll show you some other pictures of how we lived there. This is a picture taken from an old castle that was fairly close to us there. From up in the castle, you could look down, you could see the tent area. Our tent's right over in here. And each crew had 2 tents. They had a tent for the pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator lived, and then they had a tent where the rest of the crew lived. And this shows some of the other tents in the area. You can see part of the old castle sticking up over here. And we made a lot of things. We had a lot of time when we weren't flying, and none of the crew hung around in the bar. They had a little club there, but none of the crew hung around in that. The crew, we played together. The crew was always together. When we didn't have to fly, we'd go into town, we'd do this, we'd do that. And I always liked to build things. So here was one of my projects. I got an old drum actually, cut a door into it. Then you can see a line going here. It went out to a gas tank outside that we put 110 octane gasoline in. Funny we didn't blow ourselves out of there. Then I had a diffuser inside here, and the line went into the diffuser. We'd open the line a little bit, and it'd drip gas into the thing. We'd light it, and we'd have what we called a big cookout. The guys that have their folks send them things from home. Plus, we had a built-in supply of potatoes, some poor farmer. Here's his potato field just starting. Here's our tent over in here, kind of the second one over. And these are all potatoes. And what we do is we'd go out there when he wasn't there and we'd dig around the plants and we get some potatoes out of the ground. And then we'd take them, we put the dirt back around the plant so he couldn't tell that we were doing it. Then we'd cook these potatoes at night or whatever else we could get. And it was a lot of fun. We'd all be in there partying, playing poker, and having a really good time. They had a club there called, well, they just had a club. Our squadron was named after Snow White in the 7th Ward. And you can see Snow White's picture here. Here's a picture of old Grumpy hanging up on the wall. Our airplanes, a lot of them had the names on them. Here's one called Dopey. We used to fly a plane occasionally called the Witch. And it finally crashed. I'll show you some pictures of it when it crashed. That was an interesting thing. Here's, now we're getting into those bad pictures that I was telling you about. This is a picture of Sid. He's shaving. He's out there. We made this thing. We just got some poles. This is a de-icer tank out of an airplane that crashed. And we just fill it up with water, and the sun would heat the water, and we had a little copper tube. And the table here, we had a helmet upside down, carved into a little table. And we had a mirror up there so we could shave. Here's Bob Leonard using the thing. And you'll notice that most of the time, you'll see them running around in their shorts. That's the way we rest around there most of the time. It's pretty hot there in Italy. We were in southern Italy. Inside the tent, we also made a lot of stuff. Here's a picture of me. Here's a little thing I made back there, kind of a writing table. And you can see that we had mosquito nets on all of the beds. There were a lot of mosquitoes. And so when we're sleeping, we'd throw the mosquito nets down and protect us from the mosquitoes. Here's Sid in his shorts. This is John Yurko. Here's Slack and Johnny Matozo. And this fellow flew with us occasionally on a mission until we were on a particularly rough mission one time, and I think he quit flying. When we'd sometimes lead, we'd have an extra man. On a normal mission, our radio operator would fly in a tail gunner spot, but we became a lead crew, and which meant we would lead the mission. And when we led the mission, the radio operator would always sit at his table and communicate with the base back home if necessary. Here's Sid writing a letter to Gladys, probably. He was a good man. He wrote lots of letters to her. It's kind of interesting. Since we were officers had to, they'd censor the mail. So all the mail that had come through, it'd have to be censored. So we'd sit over there and read this mail, and it got kind of funny sometimes. And we were very careful that we never did censor a letter of anyone that we knew. None of us wanted to do that. This is Marty Slack. Marty Slack, he was kind of a wild cuss once in a while, but on every mission, he'd sit back in the back there. He was our ball gunner. And he'd sit back there and read his Bible. A lot of the men on our crew were very religious, and we had just about every faith imaginable. We had Jews, Mormons, Catholics, Methodists, you name it, we had them. Here's an interesting shot. One day, most of us didn't have to fly practice missions, but Sid and Bob had to for some reason. So we're all out at the beach, and they knew we were going to be at the beach. We'd go to town and rent a bicycle and ride out to the beach. And if you see this little spot right here, a little dark spot, that's a B-24 about 5 or 10 feet off the water. And he's coming right at us. Sid knew where we were. So he gets closer and closer, and he flew by over to the side. And the next time he came over us, he came He came right over the top of us, really low. He was pretty good at doing that. John Matozo, tail gunner. Nice looking guy. Nice guy. I just loved everybody on this crew. I just couldn't have found a better, nicer bunch of guys to fly with. Every one of them were just absolutely tops. This guy was a first-class musician, professional musician. He played with the big bands. He was a drummer. And an interesting thing happened. We were at the Isle of Capri for a rest camp. Johnny was very shy. He spoke Spanish fluently. And when we were in South America, we tried to get him to line us up with some of the girls, and he was so bashful he wouldn't even talk to them. So we didn't do too good there. But we were at this place on the Isle of Capri, and some Italian men were trying to play American swing, and they weren't doing too good. And Johnny is telling us, boy, those are the same kind of drums I use that guy's got. Those are really good drums. So we said, hey, why don't you go play? And he goes, no. So I went over to the band leader and I told him that Johnny was Benny Goodman's drummer, which wasn't true. But I said, he's Benny Goodman's drummer, because everybody had heard of Benny Goodman. So he waved to Johnny, Benny Qua or something, whatever he says. And so Johnny finally goes up there and moves the drums around a little bit and starts going ding 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 ding. And suddenly all the GIs start looking. Now they're finally hearing some really good rhythm. And another guy way back in there saw Johnny and knew him. He was a professional musician. He played a bass, and he come up and he didn't even ask the guy if he could play it. He just took the bass from the guy and starts playing bass rhythm with John. And then another musician came up, a piano man, and suddenly it's just a madhouse. And he played all night long until way after it got light. Nobody went home. They all just loved it. All these GIs were dancing with each other and really having a great time. Picture of Chick Pearson and myself. Here's a picture of John Yurko and Chick Pearson. Bobby Leonard. Wherever we went, if we had Bob Leonard with us, girls would come talk to us because he was so good looking and he really had a way with women. So he was the official liner-upper. John Yurko, fine guy, fun guy, always full of fun, always laughing, always joking, but first-class engineer. Boy, he kept that airplane flying when I don't think hardly any other engineers could keep it flying. I'll have to tell you a little later, I'll tell you about a particular mission where old John saved our bacon. I'm not going to talk about too many combat stories, but we'll talk about a few in a little while. Here's Hal Weekly horrifying us when he was trying to sing. Yeah, he couldn't sing worth a darn. Thought he could. Here's old Hal again. Great guy, great sense of humor, a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. Always fun to be around. Great navigator. First class navigator. Here's Fred Slack again. You notice the shorts, that's the uniform most of the time. Here's Elmer Marty. Elmer was a radio man. He was a radio instructor at Peterson Field. And we had a radio operator first that didn't fit in with the crew too much. His personal cleanliness wasn't up to par, the crew felt. In fact, they were going to give him a wash job using GI brushes and some GI soap. They probably did. Anyhow, Sid replaced him, and when Elmer heard that we were looking for a radio operator, everywhere we went, our crew just kind of stood out. And so he wanted to be on our crew. He knew he was going to have to go overseas, so he quit being an instructor and got on our crew, and he was a first-class guy and a first-class radio operator. Had a tailor and a barber shop there on the field, a couple of Italian gentlemen running it. As you can see here, you get a shave for a nickel, you can get a haircut for 2 cents. Then he had the tailor. This young man here worked for us. He was a local young man there, and we hired him, and he just took care of our tent, and we'd send our clothes home to one of his relatives. I think it was his mother, and she did a great job of laundering our clothes, and we really appreciated him. He was just really a nice kid. And this is Yurko and Pearson. Here's the worryworm. This was before a mission, but we'll get into all of that a little bit later. I'll go through a mission with you. Seemed like we had a card game going a lot. Here's a big card game going. We'd have the big fry and then the big card game. Here's Yurko. Here's Kame. Here's Elmer. And here's our navigator, Hal Weekly. Card game continues. Guy named Leo McElwain, who I knew in bombardier school, incidentally. He was shot down a few days after this was taken. But he got back. He was shot down, but he returned. He'd been severely hurt, but he got back okay. This is Weekly and I. We'd had about 20 missions. This is one of our airplanes called Doc. There were a few crashed Nazi airplanes, German airplanes around our field. Here's the tail of one of them. That's Johnny Yurko. He and I were down there searching for junk to help fix our tents up. Here's the tail. I think this is off of a Messerschmitt 109. And this is a Messerschmitt 109 here. That's me staring off into space there. Good shot of Bobby Leonard. Bobby always smiling, always happy, always had a little joke to say. Great guy. Another shot of him. It's interesting. I don't think, after I met Bobby in Colorado Springs, I don't think we were ever apart. Good friend. Oh, Hal Weekly and Chick Pearson. That's the nose of a B-24. That's where Weekly and I hung out. Back down in there, right behind them, was the Bombardier Navigator's compartment. And up above that is a turret, a ball turret, and that's where Pearson rode. It's interesting. One time, his turret was hit, and I was right behind it, and he yelled for help. And he'd had a direct hit right in front of his turret, and the bulletproof glass in that turret's about 2 inches thick, and it had just shattered it, and he was full of glass. I opened the doors. There's some doors to open, 2 sets of doors to get into there. And when I opened the doors, I only weighed about 130 pounds in those days. And with his gear, all his flight gear and all the stuff that he had on, he was pretty heavy. And I just lifted him out of there like he was a doll, set him on the floor. And he had blood all over him, and he had glass all in his face and in his eyes. And we put sulfa powder on him, and the blood immediately froze. It quit bleeding. It was awfully cold up there. It's about 40 or 50 below zero. And when we landed, course, the ambulance met us, and they took him off to hospital, and they got all the glass out, and he was okay. Didn't have any more problems. They did a good job fixing him up. We had a great engineer. Johnny Yurko took really good care of our airplane. So did our ground crew overseas. They just did a remarkable job of keeping those things flying. They'd get shot up, and these guys would get them all back together and get them flying. I don't know how they do it. Okay, mission starts the night before. The ground crew gasses up the airplane. They fix it. They make sure it's flying right. Fix everything, get it perfect shape. They have a briefing the night before a mission, and the pilots and bombardier go to that. So Sid and I would go to those meetings. And of course, it was particularly important after we became a lead crew. The ground crew would put bombs in the airplane. Here they are putting bombs. This is our airplane. This is the Worry Worm. They're putting bombs in it. This is a 2,000-pounder. I'm sitting on it. Now after, in the morning, we'd only go to, Sid and I'd only go to a briefing the night before on very special missions. But sometimes, well, we'd always go to a briefing in the morning and of the mission. And after the briefing, Sid would always brief the crew. Here he is telling the crew where we're going to go, what we're going to do, what's going to happen. Of course, the crew is always really interested in this. Getting ready for the mission, everything. The crew like to play. They like to have a lot of fun, but when it's time to work, the mood changes. Everybody became dead serious. We were all good at our job, and we were dead serious about it. You can see, this is Bobby Leonard. You can see he's very serious about this, so slack. And this is Sid back there. Everybody was good. Everybody did a good job. Another briefing at a different time, or maybe the same briefing, I'm not sure. Just before a mission, a couple of those guys, or just one of those guys, this gentleman right here, was not a regular member of the crew, but this was a mission we were probably leading, so as like I said, we have an extra man, so we'd fly an 11-man crew when we were the lead plane. Once again, just before a mission, everybody's suiting up, getting ready to fly. Then after we got all ready to go, they'd tell us exactly what time to start engines and so forth and so forth. Then when we taxied, it's very important that we get in the right position, because as we take off, we all form into squadrons in the sky and then into groups, and everybody has to get into the right place. So it's important when you take off, you're behind the plane that you're going to form up. So everybody gets in line based on how they're going to fly in the sky. And here you can see planes in front of us on the taxi strip. Their engines are running. We're all ready to take off. And when it's our turn, away they go. So when it's our turn, Sid pours coal to it, and away we go. This shows the landing gear coming up. This is the right main landing gear coming up. Then we'd form into these squadrons. Now a squadron is 7 planes. This is a squadron. You can see the 7 planes. This is the lead plane here. And then these are other squadrons forming up. And they continue to circle round and round and round until they get all formed up and get the 4 squadrons get together, and that's a group, and then the group gets together and they form a wing, and then away you go. These are just more airplanes forming into these squadrons and groups. Okay, we're in the air on a mission. This is Johnny Yurko sitting right between Sid and Bob. You can't see Sid and Bob. Bob Leonard's over here, the co-pilot. Sid Paisner, the pilot's over here. This Bob Leonard flying the airplane. You can see an airplane off to his right in formation with us. This is Johnny Matozo and his tail turret in the back. As you can see, these pictures aren't too good. This is what I was talking about earlier. I'm sorry they're not better. But on the other hand, I feel fortunate that they're this good with that bad camera. Here's the only picture I have left of Sid flying the airplane. It's not a very good picture, but it's the only one I have left. I had better ones, but I gave them away. Another shot of Bob Leonard at the controls. Here we are in formation. There's a plane right in front of us. And we're following in number 4 position, which means we're right behind the leader and a little below. We're at altitude now. This is Hal Weekly. He's wearing the regulation uniform of the time, standard uniform. He's wearing a sheepskin lined hat. And he's wearing a sheepskin jacket, got his oxygen mask on, which has a microphone on the inside so that he can talk. Picture of me, same thing. I'm in there with Hal. Hal has a table back in there. This is the nose turret up here, and we're just behind the nose turret. And up towards the front of the airplane a little bit, Hal has a table where he does his navigation. Down a little bit right over here is the Norden bomb site. I've got a picture of the Norden bomb site here. The bombardier looks in through the eyepiece right here. There's a sponge rubber thing there. He looks in through there with one eye. And the Norden bomb site was very secret back in those days. They wouldn't let anybody see it. They had a guard with it. They'd take it out of the airplane, put it in a vault, take it out, put it back in the airplane. Didn't want anybody to know how it worked, find out about it. It was quite accurate. A good bombardier from 20,000 feet could get pretty close with this. I have to tell you an interesting story about this. Hal and I were in this compartment all the time, and on either side of the compartment was a big box, quite high. It was about 2.5 feet high, 30 inches high, and it was about 4 feet long. It was full of caliber 50 machine gun bullets. We had flak suits that we could wear, but what Hal and I would do, we heard that underneath the floor of the bombardier's compartment there was armor plate, so that if any flak exploded right below you, the armor plate would stop it from coming up and hurting the bombardier or the navigator. So we hung these flak suits alongside of these boxes of shells, and sometimes when we're flying and we didn't have to do anything and we're in combat, we'd get down between these boxes thinking we had some protection. So when we were all finished with our missions, one day we saw a B-24 that had gone in on its nose, and they were working on the nose, so we wandered over there and we're looking, and we couldn't see any armor plate. They had it all apart underneath the bombardier's compartment. So I asked him, "Where's the armor plate?" And he said, "What armor plate?" He said, "The only armor plate you got is just a little thin piece of aluminum, and anything can go through that." And Hal and I about dropped dead because we thought we'd been protected all the time. Here's a great shot. This is a shot taken from, there's an observation dome right between the pilot and the bombardier's compartment where the navigator uses his sextant to shoot the stars or the sun to get a navigational fix. And I climb up in there and I put my head in there and I can see Sid and Bob. So this time I put a camera up in there and just aimed it backwards and fired. You can see Sid's face here. You can see his helmet. You can see the white from the sheepskin. You can only see part of his nose because his face is covered with an oxygen mask. Same here, Bobby Leonard. He's flying over here. Pretty good shot of both of them. Here's a shot of a B-24 under attack by fighters. You can tell they're under attack because the ball turret's down. If they're just normally flying and there's no fighters around, that ball will be retracted up inside the airplane. And when fighters come around, the ball gunner lowers it, or the other gunners lower him down, really, and then he does his thing. Then they pump it's a hydraulic pump that actually pumps it back up inside the airplane after the fighters leave. Another shot of a B-24 in front of us. These bad marks that you see on the film, they're problems with developing. Nothing to do, it wasn't my camera, it was just developing. What I had to use, I used 35 millimeter film that was left over from the strike photos. They have movie cameras that take photographs of the bomb hits. And then they have little pieces of film left over, and I got those, and I'd actually use those in my 35 millimeter camera because there's no way you could buy film over there. Shows a B-24 flying along, and you can see flak exploding. B-24 dropping his bombs. You can see another B-24 dropping some bombs up in here. See some flak exploding, just light flak here and there. Here's a interesting picture. You really can't see too much. You can see a B-24, but right over by the B-24, this dark area right here is actually a German plane that got shot down. And most of that's smoke, but part of it's a German airplane. Here's a scary picture, enough to scare any guy that's been in air combat to death. This is a whole bunch of flak going off. These are all individual explosions from one gun. One of these shells, the shell itself is about 1.5 feet long and it's about 6 inches in diameter, and it's like a hand grenade. And when it explodes, all these little pieces of steel about a 1/2 inch thick go flying through the air. So each one of these explodes and thousands of little pieces of flak go in all directions. So in a barrage type thing like this, it's just filled with flak in there, and any plane that's in there is going to be seriously damaged, or more than likely would be shot down. What they do, they track you with one gun for a while. They track you along and they keep changing. Each gun shoots and they change it just a little bit till they figure that they've got the exact altitude and your airspeed. Then they shoot off a whole bunch all at once, trying to get you. Sometimes they knock out an engine, or a fighter knocks out an engine, or sometimes an engine just quits and you have to feather the prop. That's what happened here. Here's a tragic picture. This is a B-24 that only lasted a few seconds after this was taken. It's on fire. You can see all the fire. And then, unfortunately, it exploded. In this next shot, you can see 2 pieces of it. It blew in half, and one section went this way and one section went the other way. And keep in mind, there was from 9 to 11 guys on that airplane. Here's a waist gun, machine gun, caliber 50 machine gun in the waist of a B-24, and you can see a squadron out there forming. Here's a interesting picture. It's hard to see this airplane, but I've drawn a circle around it. That's a B-24 that's being shot down. And one of the men on that airplane, his name was Carl Karsh. I think he was from Long Island, and he was a friend of Sid and Gladys Paisner's. And I'm happy to tell you that they did get shot down. They went down and the plane crashed. And but I checked with Sid later after the war, and he told me that he got back safely. He wasn't hurt. He got out okay. This is one of the guns, the 88 millimeter guns that they'd shoot those shells at us with. This is a picture of one. You can see the shell that they'd shoot, see how long of it. Most of it's gunpowder, but about the last 18 inches of it is the shell that actually came up in the air, would try and shoot us down. This is the Worry Worm, Worry Worm 2. Served us faithfully. One day we were on a mission and we were hit before bombs away. We were the first plane to be hit in the squadron, hit bad. And it shot the cylinder off of one engine. The number 3 engine had a cylinder shot off. Number 2 engine had a cylinder shot off, the top cylinder. And all this oil was pouring down out of the engine down into the turbocharger, which was a supercharger, which is really hot. We had loss of control. We had all kinds of problems. We thought we were going to crash for sure. And but we dropped out of the formation. Naturally, we didn't have power. We couldn't fly. We couldn't control it. We didn't have any up control. We couldn't make the nose come up far enough. So we kept going down. We flew that one engine for about 15 minutes, I think, before we had to feather it. The engines on that airplane each hold a reservoir of 50 gallons of oil, and it was pumping the oil out. And just before the oil ran out, we had to shut it down. But in the meantime, we had all kinds of problems. We were low. The fighters were coming after us because we were away from the squadron. Bobby Leonard called for fighter support, and fortunately they heard us and came down. The top gunner came, started getting all excited, said, "Hey, here comes a bunch of P-51s to help us." There were some 109s coming after us. So anyway, a big war started down there around us, and we were throwing out all kinds of stuff to keep this thing flying. We couldn't figure out why we couldn't pull the nose up. And Johnny Yurko, our engineer, finally figured out why he couldn't pull it up. The airplane was shot up real bad. It had something like 276 new holes that we counted from flak. We were hit by flak this day, not by fighters. And so we had 276 new holes made by flak. We just shot all the heck. The wing, I think, has something like 12 fuel cells in it. I think it punctured every one of them. But they're self-sealing, supposedly. But we had big problems. There was a chance that we were just going to have to bail out right there. But Sid and Bobby did a really great job keeping that thing flying, and Johnny Yurko did a masterful job of keeping the thing going. And he finally figured out that the reason we couldn't pull the nose up is because a piece of flak had gone through the control column on Bobby Leonard's side, on the other side of the dash panel. And it flared a big piece of steel out of this tube that goes through the dash that hooks the controls on. When you'd pull the wheel back, that flare in this tube would catch where it went through the dash, and it wouldn't let it come back any further. So he unhooked Bobby's controls. Then Sid was able to fly the plane. It was quite a day. It was a very exciting day because of all the fighters and the flak, and scary day. It was just awful. Anyway, we finally get back to Italy, and we're navigating for a field up in northern Italy, and we had to cross the Adriatic Ocean to get there. And we were heading for this field, and we saw another field and we could see P-51s and mosquitoes on this field, so we knew it was an Allied field. So we couldn't radio. The top of the cockpit had all been shot out, and the radio controls are all hanging by the cables. Anyway, we were down to 2 engines at this time. And we're making a landing, and one engine quits. It had run out of fuel. We got just a little ways to go. Then the last engine quit, and we're still in the air, so Sid made a dead stick landing. And just then, that control column started to jam up again. But somehow Sid got it on the ground. He just did a fantastic job flying that airplane. And it rolled to a stop. The airplane had been on fire, and the fire went out. And oil all over it from this engine being shot up. And it really looked awful. And it rolled to a stop, and we all got out. All these guys, these fighter pilots come running over there, and they're looking at it. I've never seen an airplane so beat up looking. Full of holes, oil dripping all over it, and you could see the black from the fire. And one of them said to me, "Oh man, I've never seen such a beat up looking airplane." And I told him, "Oh, this isn't too bad. We had to stop here just because we ran out of gas. Sometimes they're a lot worse than this." Of course, I was lying to him. They don't get much worse than that. And we all laughed. We all thought that was funny. Then we found out that these P-51s that had come to our rescue were these guys, the same guys. And then when we found that out, and they found it out, then there was lots of excitement because a guy named Green, I think he was a captain of the squadron, had shot a 109 down that was trying to shoot us down. And he became an ace that day. So that was cause for big celebration. So we had a big celebration. Then the next morning they sent an airplane back up to pick us up from our field. We all jumped in it and started to taxi out, and a tire blew out. Horrible noise. And a big piece of rubber blew off of the tire and hit one of the bomb bay doors and knocked the bomb bay door off, and the plane kind of lurches down to one side, and we didn't know what to think. We all jumped out of it and ran. We were all kind of spooky that day. Then we saw what happened, then we all started laughing. It was quite a day. But that plane never did fly again. They couldn't make it fly right after that. It was just shot up too bad. So they gave us a new plane. B-24 blowing up. Picture, we saw crashes all the time. I was outside from the tent one day watching some guys doing some practice takeoff and landing. And I saw this plane crash. Knew it was a friend of mine. I ran over there just as hard as I could. I was about the first one over there. And you can see this plane's just demolished. There's nothing there. And it was kind of burning and smoldering away when I got over there. And when I got there, one of the crewmen was right in here and all this black stuff. And he raised his hand to show me where he was. I wouldn't have even seen him because he was just mixed in with all that other stuff, and he was all black and burned. Unfortunately, I think he passed away. The co-pilot, who we knew well, he and his whole seat went flying out of the airplane and bounced along in all the dirt. It crushed his pelvis, but he survived, and they fixed him up, and he was okay. Here's a gunner that flew with us named Fox. He was a ball gunner. He'd finished his missions long before, but he refused to go home. He wanted to stay there till the war was over, and they'd let him pick the crews that he wanted to fly with. And he hadn't been flying for a little while, and then when our ball gunner had finished his missions, there were about 3 or 4 missions left to fly with the crew, and so this guy filled in and flew with us. He'd shot down 5 confirmed airplanes. He'd shot down more, but they weren't all confirmed. We made newspapers. This is a mission we led. They'd been having a hard time. This is a very important bridge up through the Po Valley. They'd been having a very hard time getting rid of this bridge. it's a very hard target to bomb because of where it is. And anyhow, we went up there, and after we led this mission, and when the mission was over, these are the official photographs of the mission. One of the bombers carries a camera, and they photograph each target. And they thought this was pretty good bombing. All of those things are from our same outfit. They're all in that target. So this was put on the first page of Stars and Stripes newspaper all over Europe. And I understand that it was also in the Stars and Stripes in Japan, so we made the headlines. Here's a very interesting picture. This shows a target. You can see the target here. You can see the target's been hit because of the fires. You can see all of the flak that's been coming up. And some of these targets that they'd put these smoke screens up, they were very hard to hit. And the way we did that, this is what we called a Mickey navigator. And this is a radar set that he had. And he would read tangents on his radar screen. And he would call the tangents to me, and I'd set the tangents into the bomb site, and we'd bomb through this smoke screen that way. And the only thing wrong with this is we had to practice all the time. So what that meant, Sid and I and Bob and the engineer and this guy would go jump in an airplane and go practice. And they'd load that thing up with all these little bombs, and we'd go drop them one at a time. There was a big destroyer anchored way out in the ocean, and we'd practice dropping bombs on it. And in fact, regularly, we'd have to practice, and so it got so boring that sometimes Sid would do the bombing. He'd be the bombardier, and I'd be the pilot. So I'd go up and fly the airplane, and Sid would go down and fly the bomb site. And those were kind of wild, funny days. One time, thinking of Sid not flying, we talked Sid into, he wondered what it felt like getting into the ball turret and being dropped out of the airplane like that. It's really scary, because what you do when you get in it, you put your feet straight down and you get into the thing. You look through a hole right between your feet, between your toes. It's about 10 inches in diameter is all. That's how you look out. You got a caliber 50 machine gun right alongside each leg. The door is right behind you, so your safety belt is actually in your back. It goes from your right side to your left side. It's a big wide belt, and you put the thing there in case the door comes open. You'd fall out if you didn't have this safety belt on, because when you go down, then you move the controls and your feet go up, so you're actually just sort of laying on your back. It's real scary. So we got Sid in there, lowered the turret down, and when he got over on his back, it's scary. He decided he didn't want to be in there any longer, just like the rest of us. So we pumped the thing up and got him out of there. But the radar plane in our squadron was a plane called the Witch. Here's a picture of it. We had that Snow White and the Seven White and the Seven Dwarfs, and this is the Witch. This is the radar plane. And it was really a clunky airplane. In fact, our CO, Killer Kane, told us if we'd go up and fly that thing and jump out of it and crash or something, get rid of it, he'd give us all a raise in rank. So if you're a second lieutenant, you'd become a first lieutenant, et cetera, et cetera. But what happened to it, it was taken off one time and it crashed. Here's a picture of it. Almost looks like an atomic bomb, doesn't it? But it didn't, nobody was hurt. It crashed on takeoff and then caught on fire and burned. Nobody was hurt. Pictures here are interesting. You can see B-24s, see a B-17, and you can see an Italian warplane over here. We were flying out of an Italian field, and then you had Italian fighters and different kinds of Italian airplanes there. Here's a happy picture. This is Chick Pearson and I, the day that we finished our missions. Needless to say, we were both happy, happy, happy. And finally, another happy picture. This is the day that Sid and Bobby finished their missions. This shows Sid taxiing in. He liked to have his arm hanging out the plane when he taxied. Very happy day. This has been a short look into the lives of 10 very brave young men during World War II as they fought for their country. I hope you enjoyed it.